I was bleeding. Barefoot. Alone. Somewhere deep in the heart of South Africa. And that thing in my arms? It was growling. I should have run. I should have screamed. But instead, I wrapped my hoodie tighter around the tiny, shaking body and held on. God, if I only knew back then what that moment would lead to. My name's Rebecca Carter. I was 34, divorced, depressed, and dead inside when I landed in Johannesburg with nothing but a backpack and a bottle of anti-anxiety pills. I'd left everything. My apartment in Phoenix. My job in marketing. My entire, pathetic excuse of a life. Why Africa? Because I wanted to disappear. But fate had other plans. It was my third week in the bush. I'd signed up for a so-called eco-volunteer program, basically paying to shovel elephant crap and sleep in a tent that smelled like moldy socks. The place was more of a tourist trap than an actual sanctuary, but I didn't care. I wasn't here to save the animals. I just didn't want to feel anything anymore. But then it happened. One morning, around 5 a.m., I snuck out of camp. I needed space, air, anything that didn't smell like diesel fuel and cheap bug spray. I wandered farther than I should have. The sun was barely up and everything was painted in this ghostly, bluish hue. I walked along a dried-up riverbed kicking up dust until I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Not a bird. Not a monkey. Not even a hyena. It was a whimper. Tiny. Broken. Like something was crying. I stopped. Held my breath. And then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a dog. Mangy, small, and bloody. Half buried under some thorns. But then it raised its head and my whole body went cold. A lion cub. Alone. Dying. Its eyes were barely open, lips cracked, ribs poking out like piano keys. One paw was twisted at a sickening angle. And worst of all, its tiny body was covered in bite marks. Other lions had done this. My brain screamed at me to back away. This was nature. Survival of the fittest. I wasn't a vet, I wasn't a hero, I was just some broken woman on a soul-searching vacation gone wrong. But then it looked at me. Not like an animal. Like something begging. I dropped to my knees. I don't remember how long I sat there, whispering, shaking, crying. All I knew was he was mine now. I named him Koa. It means brave in Hawaiian. And neither of us knew it yet. But saving him was going to rip open every scar I ever buried. And somehow heal me in the process. I didn't carry him back. I staggered, stumbled, half-dragged my way through dry brush and thorny branches with him bundled up in my hoodie like some sacred, fragile treasure. He weighed maybe 20 pounds, but it felt like 1,000. Every step cut into my bare feet. Every root seemed to reach up and trip me. My arms ached. My mouth was dry. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. His breathing was shallow and his little body twitched like he was in pain even while unconscious. I whispered to him the whole way, nonsense really, half lullaby, half desperate prayers. You're okay, baby, you're safe now, please don't die. By the time I made it back to camp, the sun was up and I looked like a madwoman. My shirt was soaked in blood. My face scratched raw. And in my arms a goddamn lion cub. Everyone froze. You could have heard a pin drop. Then came the shouting. Everyone at the sanctuary rushed toward me like I was holding a live grenade. The camp manager, a cocky expat named Lucas, started screaming at me, "What the hell did you do? Are you insane? That's a predator, Rebecca. You could have been killed." But I didn't let go. I just stood there, shaking, clutching this little creature like he was my child. And maybe that's exactly what he was in that moment. Not a wild animal. Not a cub. Mine. And I wasn't letting anyone take him from me. Eventually, a real vet was called in. Dr. Ayanda Masiko. She was the only person who didn't look at me like I was crazy. She took one look at Koa, knelt beside me, and said in the gentlest voice, "He's lucky you found him. But it's going to be a fight." And oh my God, was it a fight. The next 48 hours were hell. They sedated him. Cleaned his wounds. Reset his broken paw. Fed him through a tiny bottle every 2 hours like an infant. I didn't sleep. I barely ate. I just sat there by his side, watching his tiny chest rise and fall. Every time he shuddered, I felt it in my bones. Every time he whimpered, something inside me cracked open. People kept telling me not to get attached. He's not a pet, they said. You'll have to let him go. But I already was attached. Because for the first time in years, I felt something. Not numbness. Not that quiet, dull ache of pretending to be okay. Real, raw, terrifying love. And Koa, he responded to it. Slowly. On the third day, he opened his eyes fully. Big, golden eyes that looked straight into mine like he remembered me. Like he chose me. On the fifth day, he licked my hand. And I broke down sobbing. Dr. Masiko started calling me Mama Leo Lion Mama. It was a joke, kind of. But it felt right. Because while everyone else saw an animal on the edge of death, I saw something else. I saw myself. Koa had been abandoned. Betrayed by his own kind. Left to die in the dirt. So had I. It wasn't just my marriage that had failed, it was me. I'd spent years pretending. Smiling at parties. Crushing deadlines. Wearing heels that made my feet bleed and a fake persona that made my soul rot. And then one day, my husband, Mark, walked in and told me he'd been sleeping with someone else for almost a year. Someone younger, easier. I didn't cry. I didn't even scream. I just packed a bag and walked out. And somewhere along the line, I stopped caring whether I lived or died. Until this tiny, broken thing needed me. Koa gave me purpose again. But it wasn't just emotional. No. This cub didn't just heal me in some cheesy movie of the week way. He pulled me into a war I didn't know existed. A world of corruption, greed, and blood money. Because a week later, I learned the truth. Koa wasn't lost. He was dumped. On purpose. It started with a whisper. I was helping Dr. Masiko apply a salve to one of Koa's deeper wounds when she suddenly paused, glanced over her shoulder, and leaned in close. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. This isn't the first, she said. I blinked at her, confused, but she didn't explain right away. She just sighed, rubbed her temples, and muttered something under her breath in Zulu. Later that night, after the camp had gone quiet, she found me sitting outside Koa's pen. The cub was sleeping soundly now, curled up in a fleece blanket I'd stolen from my own cot. She sat beside me and lit a cigarette. You want the truth? She asked. You're not going to like it. What she told me next shattered everything I thought I knew about this place. The sanctuary wasn't a sanctuary. Not really. It was a front. A slick, tourist-friendly mask hiding something much uglier underneath. The owner, Lucas, the same man who'd screamed at me when I brought Koa back, had ties to something called the canned hunting industry. I had no idea what that meant at the time. It sounded ridiculous. Like some conspiracy theory from a late-night documentary. But Ayanda showed me pictures. Reports. Eyewitness statements. I saw lions, young, beautiful, majestic lions being bred in cages. Taken from their mothers too early. Raised by hand so they'd trust humans. Then sold off. Not to zoos. Not to sanctuaries. To hunters. Rich men. Mostly from the US and Europe. They'd pay tens of thousands of dollars to fly to South Africa, sit in a fake wilderness enclosure, and shoot a lion that had never learned to fear people. That's what canned hunting meant. The animal had no chance. It wasn't hunting. It was execution. I thought I was going to throw up. Koa had been part of that system. Ayanda believed he was rejected, maybe born with a limp or injured during a fight with another cub. Maybe he'd gotten sick and was no longer sellable. Whatever the reason, he was useless to them. And when you're useless in that business, they don't waste a bullet. They dump you. Somewhere far enough that the body won't be found. Or cared about. And that's exactly what would have happened to Koa if I hadn't taken that morning walk. If I hadn't heard his cry. I sat there for hours that night, staring at the darkness, with rage boiling under my skin. I wasn't just angry for Koa. I was angry for all of them, for every innocent animal raised like livestock, used like a prop, then discarded like trash. And I was angry at myself. For not knowing. For buying into the glossy brochures and Instagram hashtags. For thinking I was doing something good. But something changed in me that night. I wasn't just Koa's rescuer anymore. I was his protector. His advocate. His goddamn mother, if it came to that. I confronted Lucas the next morning. I expected denial. Maybe mockery. What I didn't expect was the threat. He laughed in my face when I asked him about the canned hunting rumors. You Americans and your bleeding hearts, he said, not even trying to hide the sneer. You think nature is some Disney movie? These animals are worth more dead than alive. That's the real world, sweetheart. I called him a monster. He stepped closer, too close. His eyes were cold. Be careful who you talk to, he said softly. You don't belong here. And accidents happen. That should have been the end. I should have packed my things and gone home. Reported him to the authorities. Moved on. But I couldn't. Because when I went back to the medical tent, Koa was gone. Vanished. Just like that. And in that instant, I knew they were going to finish what they started. My heart stopped. I stood in the middle of the tent, frozen, unable to move, think, or even breathe properly. The small enclosure where Koa had been resting was empty. No blanket, no bottle, not even a trace of blood on the towel I'd changed just hours before. I dropped everything I was holding and screamed his name, once, twice, louder each time. Nothing. No rustle, no growl, no answering cry. Just silence. Cold, suffocating silence. I tore through the tent, ripping back flaps, throwing open crates, scanning every shadow. Still nothing. My hands were shaking so violently I couldn't hold my phone, but somehow I managed to call Ayanda. She was there in under a minute. One look at my face and she knew. They took him, I whispered. Ayanda's jaw tightened. We have to move. Now. She didn't even let me grab my things. She pulled me by the wrist, out of the tent and toward her dusty green Land Cruiser. We sped out of camp, leaving behind the confused looks of volunteers and the scowls of men who suddenly refused to meet my eyes. As we drove, she explained that she'd been hearing rumors, hushed whispers among the workers, things that didn't make sense. Unmarked trucks arriving in the middle of the night. Certain animals disappearing without medical records. At first, she thought it was paperwork sloppiness. But now? They're accelerating the process, she said. If Lucas knows you're asking questions, they won't wait for Koa to grow. We drove for what felt like hours, bumping through dry brush and winding dirt roads until we reached an abandoned-looking compound surrounded by rusted fencing and corrugated tin. The gates were half open, as if someone left in a hurry. Ayanda pulled out binoculars and scanned the property. Then she pointed. There. In the back, chained to a stake under the unforgiving sun, was Koa. He looked so small from that distance. So broken. He wasn't crying this time. He wasn't moving. He just lay there, head on the dirt, breathing shallowly, eyes dull. I couldn't take it. I shoved open the door and ran before Ayanda could stop me. I didn't have a plan. Just rage. And fear. And the kind of adrenaline that makes people lift cars off crushed bodies. I vaulted over the gate, sprinted across the gravel, and collapsed beside him. I'm here, I whispered, cradling his head in my lap. I'm here, baby. I found you. I didn't care who saw me. I didn't care if they had guns. I'd die before I let them take him again. Ayanda came seconds later with bolt cutters. She didn't ask questions. Just got to work. The chain was old, rusted, it snapped easier than we expected. We wrapped Koa in my scarf and carried him together, side by side, like medics in a war zone. We made it back to the car. But the engine didn't start. And then we heard the truck. It was massive. Loud. Coming fast. Ayanda cursed in Zulu and jumped out, motioning for me to get in the back with Koa. I did. I clutched him tight, pressing my face into his fur, whispering prayers I didn't even believe in anymore. The truck screeched to a stop in front of us. 3 men got out. One of them, Lucas. He looked different now. The polished charm was gone. This was the real him, hard eyes, clenched fists, rage just barely held in check. Give me the cub, he said, like I was holding a duffel bag, not a living soul. Ayanda stepped between us and him, her stance wide, fearless. You'll have to shoot me first. Lucas actually laughed. If I shoot you, he said, no one's gonna ask questions. You think this is America? But before he could make another move, another car pulled up behind us. A white pickup. With official markings. Wildlife Protection Unit. Ayanda's backup. She had called them before we left camp. Just in case. Lucas froze. The game was over. They arrested 2 of the men on the spot. Lucas tried to talk his way out, but it didn't matter. The authorities had been watching the sanctuary for months, and now, thanks to Ayanda and me, they had the final piece of the puzzle. We drove away as they hauled him off in cuffs. Koa was safe. But the nightmare wasn't over. Because now the whole world knew. And people weren't just calling me a hero. They were calling me a thief. It began with a blog post. A wildlife newsletter out of Cape Town ran a short story titled American Volunteer Interferes with Protected Lion Cub, Rescue or Theft. It featured a blurred photo of me cradling Koa, taken without my knowledge during the chaos outside the compound. The article was careful not to accuse me directly, but the implication was clear. I had no legal authority. I had broken rules. And worse, I had interfered with an ongoing conservation operation. Within days, the story went viral. Bigger outlets picked it up. CNN ran a segment. Fox News called me the Lion Lady. My inbox exploded, half love, half hate. Some people praised me, called me brave, a symbol of courage. Others weren't so kind. Entitled American white woman thinks she knows better than experts. Who does she think she is? Stealing wildlife from Africans. She's gonna get that animal killed. I tried to ignore it. First, I told myself it didn't matter. What mattered was Koa was alive. He was healing. He was safe. But the thing is, public opinion is like wildfire. And it doesn't care about nuance. It doesn't care that the sanctuary was a front for murder. It doesn't care that the vet who helped me was risking her license, her job, maybe even her life. It just wants a villain. And if you're loud, visible, and emotional, that villain might be you. Ayanda and I relocated to a real sanctuary deep in Limpopo, this one government-licensed, heavily monitored, and run by people she trusted. Koa was placed in a rehabilitation pen, with round-the-clock monitoring, proper veterinary care, and limited exposure to humans. I was allowed to visit under strict supervision. But I knew right away, I wasn't just visiting. I couldn't leave. Not yet. Not while the world was watching. Not while the people who used to own him still had money, power, and lawyers. And not while Koa still looked at me with those eyes that said, "Don't go." So I stayed. I rented a small room near the sanctuary. Took a job cleaning enclosures, preparing food, and helping with other rescues. The pay was terrible. The heat was relentless. My back ached constantly. But for the first time in years, I felt alive. Every morning I woke up with a purpose. Every night I fell asleep with a sense of peace I hadn't felt since childhood. But the media didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. A viral Instagram reel showed me playing with Koa when he was stronger. He was pawing at my sleeve, tugging gently like a house cat. The comments exploded. "She's taming him. He'll never be wild again. This is what happens when Westerners try to save Africa." I cried that night, harder than I had in years. I wasn't trying to tame him. I never wanted to turn him into a pet. I loved him, and I think he loved me too. But love, as I was learning, wasn't enough to protect him. A month after we arrived at the new sanctuary, a lawyer showed up. Not for me, for Koa. He represented a wildlife breeding cooperative and claimed that Koa had been purchased legally as part of their breeding program. He had papers, signatures, import-export codes, all of it neatly typed and filed. He demanded the animal be returned, or else they'd sue the sanctuary for illegal seizure of private property. That word, property, it made my stomach turn. They saw him as an asset, a future paycheck. Nothing more. I knew then, I couldn't just fight for this cub. I had to fight for all of them. Ayanda and I contacted every journalist we could find who'd published a story about the case. We told them the truth. Every brutal, bloody, horrifying detail. We gave them footage, names, receipts, everything. And then, I went public. Not as the Lion Lady, but as Rebecca Carter, whistleblower. I stood in front of cameras, trembling, voice cracking, holding a picture of Koa and saying, "This is not an industry. This is not tourism. This is abuse. And if I have to burn my name to the ground to stop it, I will." That's when the death threats started. And that's when I realized, saving him once wasn't enough. Now I had to protect him. From everyone, including myself. They said I was paranoid, overreacting, that the emails were just trolls. Internet nobodies with too much time and too little empathy. But tell me, does a troll know your address? Does a troll describe the exact blue scarf you wore at the sanctuary the day before? Does a troll threaten to finish what nature failed to? I didn't think so. The messages started as vague, angry rants. But they evolved, grew sharper, more personal. They used my full name, my hotel information. They even sent pictures of Koa, taken with a telephoto lens from outside the sanctuary perimeter. That's when I stopped sleeping. Ayanda took the threats seriously. She reported them, talked to local police. But we both knew how the system worked down here. Corruption bled through everything like spilled oil. Unless someone was shot or bleeding, nobody moved. And even then, they might still look the other way if the bribe was big enough. We hired a local security man, a quiet, heavy-set ex-soldier named Bongani. He didn't smile much, didn't talk much, but he never let me walk anywhere alone again. He stayed parked outside the sanctuary gate every night, engine off, hand always resting on the handle of the revolver at his side. The message was clear. Come for her and you'll have to go through me. But what chilled me more than the threats was the court order. 3 weeks after I went public, I was served a legal document by a man in a tan blazer who wouldn't meet my eyes. The breeding cooperative was suing me personally for defamation, for unlawful interference in their operations, and for theft of protected wildlife. The number attached? $500,000 in damages. My hands went numb. My ears rang. I sat on the dirt floor of my rented room, staring at the paper, trying to understand how I, just a woman trying to help, had become the villain in a legal war I never meant to fight. But here's the truth. They didn't expect to win. They just wanted to scare me, silence me, make an example out of me so the next idealistic volunteer kept her mouth shut. But they underestimated one thing. I'd already lost everything once. And when you've got nothing left to lose, you become something else entirely. Dangerous. I started documenting everything. Every threat. Every photo. Every movement. I wore a GoPro strapped to my chest when I walked through the sanctuary. Not for likes. For evidence. I met with a South African lawyer who worked pro bono on environmental cases. Tessa Makona, a woman with nerves of steel and a mouth like a chainsaw. She looked at the court papers, laughed, and said, "Let them come. They're bluffing." And we fought back. We published the documents online, redacted the names, but left the trails. We showed the public exactly how much money was made from each lion's death. One video, footage of a dying cub chained in a pen, trembling, unable to lift its head, went viral overnight. It had over 10 million views in 48 hours. Donations poured in. Journalists flew down. Netflix called. They wanted to make a documentary. Suddenly, the world was watching not just me, but them. Lucas, the breeders, the fake sanctuaries, the cowardly men with big guns and tiny hearts. And through it all, Koa stayed with me. He grew stronger, bigger. He limped at first, favoring the paw that had been broken. But he adapted. He'd sit by the fence and wait for me every morning, then chuff softly when he saw me coming. That sound, half roar, half purr, was my heartbeat. On my darkest days, I'd press my forehead to the chain link, whispering, "You're still here. I'm still here. We're still fighting." But nothing lasts forever. And one morning, Ayanda pulled me aside. "We need to talk about what comes next," she said gently, because Koa wasn't a cub anymore. He was becoming what he was born to be, a lion. And lions don't stay in cages, even ones built with love. It's strange. The moment you realize something you love can't stay with you. Not because they don't want to, but because to keep them would be a kind of cruelty. Koa was nearly 6 months old now, and already the size of a medium-sized dog. But it wasn't the size that struck me. It was the shift in his eyes. They were still warm, still full of recognition when he saw me. But something had changed. There was a focus now, a pull, like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. The wild was calling him, quietly, insistently, and every day it got louder. He began pacing the pen. Not frantically, but rhythmically with purpose. His muscles rippled under the fur that had thickened into the beginnings of a mane. When birds fluttered nearby, he'd stalk them. Not playfully, but instinctively, with frightening precision. The cub I'd rescued from death was no longer a fragile creature begging for milk. He was a predator, a king in the making. Ayanda and I had talked about this moment for weeks, always in hypotheticals. If he's healthy enough, if he can adapt to the terrain, if we find the right location. But now the conversation turned real. The sanctuary couldn't keep him forever. Not ethically, not legally, and certainly not safely. Lions don't stay tame. Not even when raised by hand. Especially not then. Eventually, they remember who they are. And when they do, no fence is high enough, no bond strong enough to stop what comes next. We found a reserve. Ayanda told me one afternoon, placing a file gently on the table like it was a newborn child. It's private, protected. No tourists, no hunting. 3,000 acres. There's already a small pride there, 2 females, both rescues. He wouldn't be alone. I stared at the map, blinking back tears. It looked like paradise. Forest, savanna, open plains, space, freedom, everything he deserved. But all I could see was an invisible line being drawn, one I couldn't cross. "Will I be allowed to visit?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. Ayanda hesitated. Once, maybe twice, but not often. They want him to integrate, not imprint. I nodded. Then I went outside and threw up behind the shed. That night, I sat by his enclosure for hours watching him sleep. The moonlight cast silver patterns across his back, highlighting the scars that still marked his side, the reminders of how close he'd come to death. I remembered the first time I'd seen him, covered in blood, barely breathing, and I felt something deep inside me fracture. He wasn't just an animal to me. He was a mirror, a survivor, proof that broken things could heal. But now he didn't need me anymore, and that hurt more than anything. The transfer was scheduled for Friday at dawn. We spent the last week preparing blood work, vaccinations, transport cage modifications. I kept it together on the outside, smiled when I needed to, nodded when asked questions. But inside I was crumbling. Every moment felt like a countdown. The last time he nudged his head against my hand. The last time he licked my fingers through the fence. The last time I whispered his name and saw his ears perk up in recognition. The morning of the move, I woke at 4. I wore the same hoodie I'd wrapped him in the day I found him. It still had a faint stain from his blood, faded but there. I stood by as Ayanda sedated him quickly, humanely, with as little stress as possible. He fought it at first, strong even in drowsiness. Then his legs gave way and he slumped gently onto the padded transport bed. I reached out and stroked his ear, trembling. "It's okay, Koa," I said. "You're going home now." The drive to the reserve took 5 hours. I sat in the back of the truck with him the whole time, stroking his fur, murmuring stories, memories, anything to keep myself from breaking. When we arrived, the handlers moved fast. They had to. He wouldn't be under long. They carried him into a secure area just inside the reserve, a kind of transition zone where he could wake up slowly and safely, away from the pride but within scent and sound range. And then came the moment I had been dreading since the beginning. Goodbye. I knelt beside him one last time, resting my forehead against his. His breathing was soft, even. He didn't know I was there. Or maybe he did. Maybe somewhere in that primal heart he felt me. I like to think so. I kissed the scar on his brow and whispered, "You saved me too." Then I walked away. And this time I didn't look back. Grief is a strange thing. People talk about it like it comes in stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, but they don't tell you how those stages can slam into you all at once. Or how they don't arrive in order like polite guests, but like waves in a storm, crashing and pulling you under when you least expect it. After I said goodbye to Koa, I thought I prepared myself. I'd imagined that moment for weeks, scripted it in my head like a scene in a movie. But the reality of his absence hit me like a gut punch. I returned to my room, small, dusty, familiar, and found it unbearable. Everything reminded me of him. The worn-out towel he used to lay on, still tucked behind my laundry bin. A bottle of formula I hadn't thrown away. Even the damn scratches on the wooden chair he used to paw at when he was learning how to climb. I tried to go back to work at the sanctuary, but nothing felt the same. I watched the other volunteers care for animals, injured monkeys, orphaned jackals, even a rescued caracal, but my heart wasn't in it. I smiled when I was supposed to, laughed at their jokes, went through the motions. But inside I felt hollow, like I'd given the best part of me away and didn't know what to do with what was left. Ayanda noticed. Of course she did. One night, as we drank tea on her porch under a flickering bulb and the sound of crickets, she said gently, "You don't have to pretend, Rebecca. He was never just an animal to you." I nodded, unable to speak. The tears came quietly, not dramatic or loud, just hot streaks that ran down my cheeks and into my tea. Ayanda didn't say anything more. She just reached over, placed a hand on mine, and held it there until the silence felt safe. It was during those weeks, those heavy, aching weeks, that the emails started again. Not threats this time. Not venom. But gratitude. Messages from strangers all over the world. People who had seen the footage of Koa's rescue and felt something stir inside them. A woman from Montana wrote to say she'd donated to a lion conservation fund in his name. A teenager from Brazil said she decided to study veterinary medicine after watching my speech. A family in Germany had started volunteering at their local animal shelter. It was overwhelming, humbling, and utterly unexpected. I read each message like a lifeline, letting their words pull me out of my spiral. Maybe my time with Koa wasn't just about us. Maybe it was the beginning of something much larger. A movement. A ripple effect. Something real. The media attention hadn't gone away either. A documentary team arrived at the sanctuary with cameras and questions, wanting to tell the full story. Not just the sensational version, the real one. They interviewed Ayanda. They filmed the sanctuary. They even got permission to visit the reserve where Koa had been released. I wasn't sure I could handle seeing him again, but I agreed to go. Not for closure. For truth. The moment we arrived, my heart leapt into my throat. The reserve was breathtaking, miles of open land, golden grass swaying in the breeze, acacia trees scattered like watchtowers. It was nothing like the sterile enclosures of the fake sanctuaries. This was wild. Real. Alive. The rangers led us to a hilltop overlook where we could observe without being seen or interfering. And then, I saw him. Koa. Not a cub. Not anymore. He was enormous. Muscular. Regal. His mane had grown in thick, dark around his face. He moved with the silent authority of something born to rule. And he wasn't alone. 2 lionesses lounged nearby, alert but calm. One of them nudged him gently with her head, and he responded with a low chuff, a sound of affection, recognition. My heart swelled and shattered at the same time. He was happy. He was home. And he didn't need me anymore. I turned away before the tears blurred my vision too much. The filmmaker placed a hand on my shoulder and asked if I wanted to record a final message for the documentary. I hesitated, then nodded. The camera rolled, the red light blinked, and I stared straight into the lens. He wasn't just a lion, I said, voice trembling. He was a symbol of everything we've forgotten to protect. And maybe, everything we still have time to save. And that was the day I decided. This wasn't the end of Koa's story. It was the beginning of mine. I flew home a month later. Not because I was ready, but because I knew I couldn't stay in South Africa forever, not yet, not legally. My visa had expired twice already, and though the local authorities had turned a blind eye because of the media buzz and Ayanda's reputation, I was pushing my luck. Besides, something inside me told me the next phase of the fight wouldn't happen in the bush, it would happen in courtrooms, boardrooms, and newsrooms. So I packed what little I had, kissed Ayanda goodbye with a promise to return, and boarded a red-eye back to Phoenix, Arizona. The same place I had once run from like a coward. Only this time I wasn't the same woman. Stepping off the plane felt like entering a foreign country. The air was dry, clinical. The airport was loud, sterile, full of people who had no idea what I just lived through. They stared at their phones, bitched about overpriced coffee, snapped selfies under fluorescent lights. No lions. No danger. No meaning. Just noise. I stood by the baggage carousel feeling like an imposter in my own skin. But the strangest part? I didn't feel afraid. Not anymore. My old apartment was long gone. My ex-husband had moved to Miami with the woman he cheated on me with, some Pilates instructor who called herself a life coach but couldn't spell serotonin. I crashed on a friend's couch for a week, then rented a tiny studio above a yoga studio in downtown Tempe. It smelled like incense and cheap tile, but it was mine. I bought a second-hand laptop and started writing. Everything. Every detail. Every scar. Every silent scream I hadn't dared release before. Then I launched the site. Saved by a Lion. It wasn't fancy. No ads. No merch. Just stories. Photos. Links to verified sanctuaries and conservation organizations. A blog where I told the unfiltered truth about what I'd seen, what I'd learned, and what no one wanted to say out loud, that most wildlife rescues are just zoos in disguise. That behind the smiling volunteers and cute animal selfies, there's often a pipeline of exploitation no one talks about. And that unless we expose it, nothing will change. The response was staggering. Within a week, the site crashed from traffic overload. Messages poured in from around the world, volunteers who'd seen similar things but were too scared to speak up. Donors who wanted to make sure their money was going to real sanctuaries. Even insiders, anonymous whistleblowers from other conservation groups started feeding me information. I'd unintentionally become a hub, a lightning rod. And with that came power. And danger. Because if there's one thing I'd learned in Africa, it's that the people who profit off cruelty don't just roll over when you tug at their leash. They snap. I started getting phone calls in the middle of the night. No one on the other end. Just silence. I came home once to find my door ajar and my desk drawers rifled through, but nothing stolen. Just disturbed. Like someone wanted me to know they'd been there. Still, I didn't stop. Instead, I did the opposite. I partnered with a global animal rights organization. They helped me legally register my site as a nonprofit. We filed formal reports against the breeding cooperative that tried to sue me, and with the help of Tessa, the brilliant South African lawyer who never let go, we opened an investigation into 3 US-based hunting companies that had been importing canned lion trophies under false labels. We were uncovering a web that stretched farther than I'd imagined. Money, politics, corruption, And at the center of it all, innocent animals like koa bred to die for someone's wall-mounted fantasy. I gave interviews. I testified via Zoom to an international wildlife panel. I debated a trophy hunter on live TV. He called me emotional. I called him a coward with a wallet fetish. The clip went viral. 10 million views. My inbox exploded again. But this time I didn't cry. I smiled. Because I wasn't just fighting anymore. I was winning. But with every win, a fear crept in. A quiet, gnawing thought I couldn't shake. What if I never see him again? What if Koa forgets me? The days turned into weeks and the weeks into months. My life had become a whirlwind of interviews, articles, and speaking engagements. I was invited to conferences, podcasts, and even a TED Talk. People wanted to hear about Koa, about the fight against Ken hunting, about the dark underbelly of wildlife tourism. I told my story over and over, each time hoping it would spark change, hoping it would make a difference. But amidst the noise, the applause, and the accolades, there was a void, a quiet, persistent ache that no amount of recognition could fill. I missed him. I missed the way his eyes lit up when he saw me, the way he chuffed softly in greeting, the way he leaned into my touch. I missed the bond we shared, the unspoken understanding between us. And more than anything, I missed the simplicity of those early days, when it was just the two of us against the world. One evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, scrolling through photos of Koa, I received an email. It was from Ayanda. The subject line read, "He's doing well." My heart leapt as I opened the message. She had attached a video, a short clip of Koa lounging under a tree, his mane now full and majestic, his eyes alert and content. He looked healthy, strong, and at peace. Tears streamed down my face as I watched him. He was thriving. He had found his place in the world. Ayanda's message was brief. "Thought you'd like to see this. He's integrated well with the pride. You're always welcome to visit." I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Could I go back? Could I see him again? Would he remember me? I wasn't sure. But I knew one thing. I needed to try. I booked a flight the next day. The journey back to South Africa was surreal. Everything felt familiar yet distant, like a dream I was re-entering. When I arrived at the reserve, Ayanda greeted me with a warm hug. "He's out there," she said, pointing towards the horizon. "Let's go see him." Wikipedia. +1. epub.chnpu.edu.ua. +1. Naorik. +1. Wikipedia. +1. We drove out to the observation point, the same one where I had last seen him. The landscape was unchanged, vast, wild, and beautiful. As we approached, I spotted the pride in the distance. They were lounging in the sun, their golden coats blending with the grass. And there he was, Koa, standing tall, his mane catching the light, his eyes scanning the horizon. I stepped out of the vehicle, my heart pounding. He turned his head, his gaze locking onto mine. For a moment, time stood still. Then he chuffed, a deep, familiar sound that resonated in my soul. He remembered. He walked towards me, slowly, confidently. I knelt down, tears streaming down my face, as he nuzzled my hand. We stayed like that for a while, two souls reunited, bound by love and trust. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the savannah, I knew this would be our last goodbye. He had found his place in the world, and I had found mine. Our paths had diverged, but our bond remained unbreakable. I whispered a final "I love you," and watched as he returned to his pride, his family, his home. I left the reserve with a heart full of gratitude and a renewed sense of purpose. Koa had given me a gift, a reason to fight, to speak out, to make a difference. And I would honor that gift for the rest of my life. The flight back to the States was a blur. I stared out the window for hours, watching the world shrink beneath me, feeling everything and nothing at once. My body was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't rest. Images kept flashing. Koa's face as he looked at me one last time, his massive frame turning back to the pride, the sound of his chuff echoing in my chest like an unfinished lullaby. I kept replaying it, trying to memorize every second, every detail. knowing deep down I'd never see him again. That moment had to be enough. I had to carry it like a flame through the darkness that was still ahead, because as beautiful as the reunion had been, I knew my fight was far from over. When I landed, everything felt smaller. The buildings, the people, even the problems. America had its own version of cruelty, wrapped in comfort and denial. People were still talking about the story. The documentary had dropped on Netflix while I was in Africa, and it hit like a bomb. Within 48 hours, it was trending globally. Emails flooded my inbox. Invitations, praise, hate, death threats. All of it. Again. But louder this time. Bigger. Sharper. There were celebrities tweeting about Koa, politicians mentioning Ken hunting during speeches, high school students organizing fundraisers. It was surreal. I went from being the woman who stole a lion cub to the woman who helped change the law because, yes, that was happening too. The pressure we'd applied with the documentary and the global attention had forced several governments to re-examine their wildlife trade agreements. One African country announced a temporary ban on lion exports. Another froze permits for hunting reserves under investigation. But the biggest win came when the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service began reviewing the import licenses for lion trophies. A small step maybe, but a step nonetheless. One that we'd forced them to take. But with every step forward, the shadow behind me grew. There were people, powerful people, who were losing money. And they wanted someone to blame. I started noticing strange cars parked outside my apartment. My mail was opened. My landlord received anonymous complaints. Once, someone broke into my place and left nothing behind but a single, claw-shaped pendant hanging from my bathroom mirror. I didn't need a translator to understand that message. Still, I refused to be scared back into silence. If anything, it made me louder. I started doing speaking engagements. Not glamorous ones. I wasn't interested in TED Talks anymore. I went to schools, community centers, universities. Anywhere someone would listen. I stood in front of rooms full of tired faces lit only by flickering projectors and told the truth. Showed them what was being done in their name. Showed them what real conservation looked like, not profit-driven tourism, not Instagram-friendly selfies with sedated lions, but real, bloody, dirty, painful, beautiful work. And I kept talking about Koa. Always about Koa. He became the symbol. The face. The soul of the movement. But I never used him as a prop. I never let them forget he was real. That he had suffered. That he had fought to live. And that his story only ended the way it did because you chose to care. One night, after a lecture at a community college in San Diego, a woman came up to me. Middle-aged, soft voice, eyes full of tears. She said, "My son saw your documentary. He's 10. He made me cancel our vacation to one of those lion parks. He said, 'Mom, I don't want to pet something that's going to die.'" She smiled, shaking her head. He asked if we could adopt a dog instead. I cried the whole drive home. Because that's what it was about. Not changing the world in a day, but changing one heart at a time. And that night, as I lay in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling of my cheap apartment, I realized something else. Koa hadn't just saved my life. He'd given me one. A real one. And I was never going back to the version of myself I used to be. It was a chilly November morning when I got the call that would change everything again. I was sipping burnt coffee in a metal folding chair at a community wildlife forum in Flagstaff, mentally preparing for another 3-hour panel on ethical tourism when my phone buzzed in my lap. Unknown number. South African country code. My stomach tightened immediately. Calls from that part of the world didn't come often anymore, and when they did, they never brought casual news. I stepped outside, the dry mountain air stinging my lungs, and answered with a cautious hello. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar. A man. Calm, clinical. "Ms. Carter? This is Jacob Radebe, veterinary director at Nyathi Reserve. I'm calling about Koa." The world narrowed. Every sound disappeared but the faint static of his breath. "Is he all right?" I asked, trying and failing to steady my voice. A pause. Then, "He's injured. We're not sure how bad yet." The breath left my body like a balloon popped mid-sentence. My knees buckled slightly and I had to lean against a cold cement pillar to stay upright. Jacob explained, in a voice both efficient and gently apologetic, that Koa had been spotted limping heavily, separated from the pride. Rangers found him lying under a thorn tree, his left side swollen, his breathing shallow. There were signs of a fight, likely territorial. He'd been moved into the reserve's on-site clinic. Stable but weak. They were doing everything they could. I thanked him in a daze and promised to be on the next flight. I don't remember packing. I don't remember the Uber to the airport or the flight details. I just remember the helpless rage, the guilt that I had let him go, that I had convinced myself freedom was enough. But it had never been enough. Not when the world was still brutal. Not when even paradise had teeth. When I arrived at the reserve, everything looked different. It wasn't the place that had changed, it was me. Before, I'd come as a mother saying goodbye. Now I came like a soldier returning to a battlefield. Ayanda met me at the gate. Her face was tight, serious, her hug brief and firm. He's alive, she said before I even asked. But it's bad, Rebecca. He's not the same lion you left. We walked to the clinic in silence. My boots crunched against gravel, each step heavier than the last. And when I saw him, my heart broke all over again. Koa was lying on his side, bandaged and breathing in shallow, labored pulls. His mane was matted with blood and dust. One eye was swollen shut. His ribs were visible even under the thick fur. But worst of all was the emptiness in his eyes. He didn't move when I entered. Didn't lift his head. Didn't chuff or twitch an ear at my voice. Just stared. I dropped to my knees beside him, placed my hand gently on his paw, and whispered, "It's me, baby. Mama's here." Nothing. A beat. Then a blink. A twitch. A low, weak rumble deep in his chest. Recognition. And I broke. I sobbed into his fur like I had the day I found him all those months ago. The smell of antiseptic and blood was overwhelming, but I didn't care. I held his massive paw like it was a lifeline. Because it was. The vet team believed he would survive, but recovery would be slow, uncertain. He might walk with a limp. He might lose his position in the pride. In the wild, weakness is death. But this was no longer the wild. Not while I was here. I stayed for weeks. Slept in the corner of the clinic. Helped clean his wounds, feed him, comfort him. The other lions came by, sometimes curious, cautious, but kept their distance. They knew something was wrong. Koa was no longer king. But he was still mine. And as the days passed, I watched that spark return to his eyes. Slowly, painfully, he started responding to sounds again. Twitching his ears. Lifting his head. He even growled at a ranger once, weak but proud. It was a miracle in real time. And during those long nights curled on a cot beside him, I realized something. I'd been wrong before. This wasn't goodbye. Not yet. Because love like this doesn't end with release or injury or even distance. It endures. It evolves. And in the middle of the African night, under a roof meant for emergencies, I whispered a promise to him. I'm not leaving this time. Not until you're ready. The days bled into one another, slow and heavy like molasses in the sun. Time in the clinic had a strange rhythm, measured not by clocks or calendars, but by small, hard-won miracles. The first time Koa stood on his own, wobbling and stiff, I wept like a child. The first time he ate a full meal without assistance, I cheered so loudly one of the vet techs nearly dropped a tray. Every gesture, every flick of his tail, every growl, no matter how faint, it was all a declaration. I'm still here. I'm still fighting. And so was I. I moved into a converted storage room beside the clinic, sleeping on a lumpy cot, showering from a bucket, surviving on black coffee and hope. But I didn't care. I wasn't here for comfort. I was here for him. Ayanda visited often. She brought me food I barely touched, updates on the reserve, and warm, quiet companionship. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. We were two women who'd been through fire, sitting in the ashes together, waiting for something to bloom again. The rangers came, too, checking in on Koa's progress. There was a quiet reverence in their eyes when they looked at him. Even broken, he commanded respect. He wasn't just another lion. He was the lion, the survivor, the symbol, the story. And they all knew it. But outside that clinic, the world kept turning. And not all of it was good. One afternoon, a courier arrived with a letter. No stamps. No return address. Just a crisp white envelope with my name in perfect black ink. I opened it cautiously, my heart already bracing for impact. Inside was a short note, typed and signed. He won't always be protected. The wild has no lawyers. No demands. No signature. Just that quiet, poisoned sentence. A reminder. A threat. Proof that my enemies hadn't forgotten. I didn't tell Ayanda. Not yet. I needed time to process, to understand what it meant. Because I knew, deep in my gut, that this wasn't just a scare tactic. It was a warning. And it wasn't about me anymore. It was about him. Koa. They couldn't touch me, not legally, not with the world watching. But him? An animal? They could wait. Wait for the attention to fade, for the headlines to die. Wait for him to be alone. I started sleeping less. Watching more. Every rustle outside the clinic made me flinch. Every stranger near the gate set my nerves on fire. I knew it wasn't healthy, this hypervigilance. But I didn't care. Paranoia kept me sharp. Kept him safe. I trusted Ayanda but not the system. Never the system. And then another twist I didn't see coming. One night, as I fed Koa under the moonlight, he suddenly pulled away, ears twitching. He sniffed the air, tense. A low growl rumbled in his chest. I stood, alert, heart pounding. Then I saw it, two figures moving near the outer fence, too slow to be animals, too careful to be rangers. My breath caught. I turned to run, to alert someone, but before I could, a blinding spotlight exploded over the field, followed by shouting in Afrikaans. The reserve security team, new hires, installed just days ago after Ayanda finally read the letter I tried to hide, descended like a pack of wolves. The intruders scattered, but not before one dropped something. A small, square device wrapped in tape. A GPS tracker. They'd come for him. Not to kill. To track. To wait. To plan. That was the night Ayanda called an emergency meeting. The board of the reserve. Government reps. Wildlife officers. And me. I didn't want to speak, but they made me. So I stood up in front of a room full of tired, grim faces and I laid it all out. The threats. The letter. The tracker. They want to know where he is, I said. They're waiting until no one's watching. And when they think it's safe, they'll come. And this time, they won't miss. Silence. Then Ayanda spoke 3 words I'll never forget. We moved the lion. I blinked. What? She turned to the board. He can't stay here. Not permanently. We need to relocate him to a classified site. A black-level sanctuary. No tourist access. No media. No visitors. Not even Rebecca. My chest went cold. Not even me. That night, after everyone left, I sat beside Koa, watching his slow, steady breaths. I ran my fingers through his mane, now fully grown and dark as earth. They're taking you again, I whispered. And I don't get to follow. He didn't understand. But he leaned into me anyway. And I broke again. Because this time I couldn't protect him with a scream or a camera or a courtroom. This time, the only way to keep him safe was to let him go. The decision was final. Once the board approved the relocation, things moved fast, too fast. I tried to keep up, tried to find loopholes, tried to offer alternatives. I suggested staying on-site as a handler, volunteering in secret, even disguising myself as staff. But none of it mattered. Ayanda looked me in the eye, her voice gentle but immovable. If they think you're near him, they'll keep coming. We have to disappear. All of us. I wanted to scream. I wanted to fight. But I didn't. Because deep down, I knew she was right. Love, real love, doesn't chain something down just because you're afraid to lose it. Sometimes love is the hardest form of release. Sometimes it's standing at the gate while they drive away, hands trembling, lungs hollow, whispering, "Please remember me." The day they moved Koa, the sky was a bruised kind of gray. It didn't rain, but the air hung heavy with that electric pressure that makes your skin crawl. The entire reserve operated like a covert military mission. No logos on trucks. No communication via radios. All phones turned off. The route was classified. The drivers were trusted officers from a specialized wildlife protection agency, men and women who spoke little and carried sidearms like jewelry. I wasn't allowed to ride with him. I wasn't even allowed to walk him to the cage. They told me it was for his safety and for mine. That if anyone snapped a photo of us together, the whole operation could be compromised. So I said goodbye the night before. I didn't tell anyone. I waited until the reserve was asleep, then slipped into the clinic like a ghost. Koa was lying in his corner, eyes half closed, still recovering but strong enough to rise if he wanted to. When he saw me, his ears flicked and he let out a soft, tired chuff. I smiled through the ache. I knelt beside him, laid my hand on his chest, and just breathed. We stayed like that for a long time. No words. No movement. Just the sound of our breaths, the thump of his heart, and the whisper of wind against the windows. I told him everything I hadn't had the strength to say. That I was proud of him. That he had changed my life. That if I could do it all over again, even knowing how much it would hurt, I wouldn't change a thing. I told him that love wasn't about proximity. It wasn't about touching or seeing or possessing. It was about witnessing. About honoring the sacred, painful miracle of survival. And I told him that no matter where they took him, I would find peace in knowing he was alive. Not in chains. Not in a cage. But free. Wild. Fierce. A lion. The next morning, I stood on the clinic steps and watched the convoy pull away. I didn't wave. I didn't chase the dust cloud. I just stood there, arms wrapped around myself, heart screaming in a language no one could hear. I stayed at the reserve for another week. Helped close out files. Cleaned out the clinic. Burned every trace of Koa's presence per the board's request. No souvenirs, no hair samples, no scent markers. Nothing that could be tracked. When I finally left, it felt like walking out of a house after a fire. The shell was still there, but the soul was gone. Back in the States, I went quiet. No more speaking tours. No more interviews. I stepped away from the spotlight, deactivated my social media, and let the noise fade. The world had moved on as it always does. Another scandal. Another trending cause. And I let it. I retreated into the shadows and spent my days working quietly with smaller sanctuaries, advising anti-poaching task forces, reviewing grant proposals. The movement didn't need my face anymore. It needed my work. And I gave it everything I had. But every night, without fail, I'd sit by my window, stare at the stars, and wonder where he was. Was he thriving? Was he still limping? Had he found a new pride? Did he still remember my voice? I told myself not to romanticize it. That he was a lion, not a fairy tale. That our bond had been real, yes, but animals move on. They adapt. They don't carry longing the way humans do. But I couldn't help it. Because I wasn't just mourning the loss of him. I was mourning the part of me that had only ever come alive in his presence. And just when I thought the chapter was closed, when I had finally convinced myself to let go for good, something arrived. A flash drive. No name. No return address. Just a padded envelope in my mailbox with South African postage and a single note inside. 4 words. He's still watching you. My hands trembled as I held the flash drive. It was small, unremarkable, just a standard black USB stick that could have come from any gas station shelf. But in that moment, it pulsed in my palm like a living thing, radiating something that felt like a warning and a promise all at once. I stared at it for a long time before moving. Checked the windows. Deadbolt the door. Drew the curtains. My paranoia had never left me fully, but now it roared back to life like a wolf at the door. I inserted the drive into my old laptop, the one I used strictly offline, no Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth, no trace.